Hello and welcome to the Virtual Reality Reconstruction Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ryan Ryder. Today we're exploring how technology is transforming urban search and rescue for missing persons. Before we dive into this, a quick thanks to our sponsor, CSI 360. They provide 360-degree crime scene cameras and VR reconstruction software for law enforcement. Check them out at csi360.net. On to our guest. I'm thrilled to welcome Paul Lake, the founder and executive director of Search One Rescue Team. Search One is a volunteer nonprofit canine search and rescue team based in Dallas, Fort Worth area. Renowned for locating missing persons for the last 40 years, Paul's team works closely with law enforcement using trained dogs and cutting-edge technology to bring lost people home. Paul, thank you for joining us on the show. We're excited to hear your insights on how tech is used in search and rescue. Welcome to Virtual Reality Reconstructionist. We're here with Paul Lake today. Paul, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and I just want to start off with the audience, let them know about yourself. So can you, I know you founded Search One in 83. Can you kind of give us some background on how you got there and why you started Search One for us?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I get that question a lot, actually, and I kind of ties back to being raised in a law enforcement family of sorts. My uncle was FBI, and my brother, who was 8 years my elder, left to go be FBI right after high school in the 60s when you could do that without having to go to college, and so he did that. That was the start of his 37-year law enforcement career. He eventually came back to my home state and became a state trooper, and then eventually moved over to the county sheriff's department, and that's where he finished out his career as a shift commander there. And so I grew up obviously idolizing my brother and wanted to get involved in law enforcement as early as I could. And but the Lord blessed me with artistic and design capabilities, and I chose that as my career path primarily because that's where the money was. And but I still became a reserve deputy as soon as I turned 21. Became an EMT. In those days, in the early 70s, mid 70s, the only people that really could get EMT certifications were those that were already either working on an ambulance or in law enforcement. So I took advantage of that, kind of fell in love with emergency medicine as well. And those things were my adrenaline junkie fix on the side as I pursued a career in the design field as architectural designer. Fast forward to early 1980, I got transferred to Dallas for my career and started looking for a search and rescue team. I had actually been involved with a fire rescue squad in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 3 years prior. That was the pit stop between my upbringing in rural Alabama to getting here to Dallas. And kind of fell in love with the rescue aspect of the emergency medical stuff and looked for a team in the Dallas area to plug into and couldn't find one. Plugged into a group that was primarily emergency medical called Dallas Emergency Corps. Tried to move them towards the search and rescue, and it was more of a typical volunteer group in those days. And I tell people that most volunteer groups, when they have people who pay dues and get a vote, are very difficult to manage because they, if you ever get 10 people to agree on what to do, you're not likely to get them to agree on how to go do it. So most volunteer structures get kind of stuck in that cycle, and I was determined that that wasn't the way it should be. And after trying to move that organization in that direction for a while without much success, I just started brainstorming how to build one from the ground up. And so I put together a business plan over the next 3 years. As I traveled, I kind of thought my way through that stuff and put it out to all the major law enforcement agencies here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area at one point and said, hey, if I build it, will you come, sort of? And got positive feedback from all of them. And Once I did that, I handpicked 6 guys that could walk and chew gum at the same time, which was no small task. Put them through about a year's worth of training, and we didn't have dogs at that point. We were a search management team and man trackers. We had brought in the nation's top man tracker, which was a guy from the Border Patrol, and taught us 40 hours of man tracking. So we had that in our toolbox, but we didn't have dogs. We couldn't even spell dogs in those days. And we hit the ground running. And after about 3, 4 years, we had a guy join our team that did have a dog, came from the military, showed us what dogs could do. And after that changed the whole profile of the organization. I got a dog, and we brought some handlers that were already on the ground that didn't have our organizational skills but had really good dog skills. We kind of merged them with our team, and like they say, after that, the rest is history. As soon as we got brought dogs on the team, it changed how the agency saw our benefit, and we've been going strong for, I know it's hard to believe that I'm that old, but 43 years now.
And when you start at 12, that's the way things
Yeah, I
go.
try to get people to believe I was only 4 years old when I started the team, and I can't get anybody to buy that lie. So,
Different things for different folks, right? But yeah, I appreciate you staying that long. That's a great story. So, as the executive director, what do you think are the capabilities have advanced in the last 10 years that have really made a difference in your business?
probably technology wise would be the drones. And I'll tell you a little bit about my philosophy. I actually had an organization offer to donate a drone to us. I guess it's been close to 10 years ago. And at that time, it was relatively new in the search and rescue world. That was one issue. But secondly, I didn't have anybody that had the bandwidth to do the job I needed them to do day in and day in and day out, and take on that additional skill and do it right. And so that's been my commitment since day one, is that whatever we produce in terms of deliverables to the law enforcement agencies that we serve has to be done with excellence. And I wasn't willing to compromise that. And I was smart enough at that time to know that bringing on a drone and the licensing and the expertise required to do that right was significant. And all of our dog handlers and flankers and base management people were trying to balance work life, family life, training 4 hours every weekend, and averaging 10 search calls a month in their existing bandwidth already. And so it wasn't until about 3 years ago that one of our former members, retired Fort Worth PD SWAT officer who'd been with the team a number of years, and he retired from the team for a while and then decided he would like to come back, and drones was kind of what he was interested in. And so because of his availability and capability, I opened up the grant um, program again to try and fund that, and was able to successfully fund drones. And he's really run with that ball and made it a huge asset. And we just recently had a find within the last couple of months where local law enforcement agency had their drones out. Our drone team showed up. They had searched for quite a while for an elderly Alzheimer's patient, and our drone pilot was able to find him um, in an area that had already been searched by law enforcement, actually, and spotlight him with a high-powered spotlight so that fire department and law enforcement could actually physically locate him and extricate him and get him out. He was down and not in good condition at the time, and so that was a pretty big win for us. And so the technology around that is probably the number one thing, but there's been a bunch of other things too, and be happy to talk to you about those as we go along.
Yeah, that's a great story, especially happening recently. I know they're advancing through all kinds of businesses, but yeah, in your business, I know even when I retired from the street, the drones were picking up pretty heavily, and we were using them and for searching for people and car crashes and
Yeah.
assessing fires, and they almost became a tool that we were wondering how do we do this without it. Yeah, I haven't it that long. Y'all are probably in that same stage. It's a great tool, and um, as long as you can keep them up in the air, they're going to help out even the teams on the ground. I'm sure you find out that it's not just about a search capability, but giving them a direction where the drone can't find or look, even with maybe they did a thermal or something, but
Yeah,
still need people on the ground to support it and move different areas.
it's affected our strategy, our ground search strategy. It's also enhanced our probability of detection significantly. Even prior to drones, any air asset was a layer of additional coverage for a particular target area. So if you think about a ground asset like a search dog team covering let's just say a square mile of property, they have X probability of detection, and that X is calculable based on time of day, weather, wind, condition of the dog, and terrain, environment, all that kind of stuff. There's a formula for that. And so at the end of that, you've got one asset that's covered a target area at X probability of detection. If you are able to layer over that another asset, whether it's another ground asset, maybe it's a four wheeler that runs hasty through the area as on the travel aids. That increases your overall probability detection of the subject in that 1 acre. And then if you can fly over it with either a fixed wing or a helicopter type situation with good observation, obviously that increases your probability detection significantly as well. And so with the advent of the drones and thermal imagery and high resolution video in real time, that extra layer from the air covering what's being done on the ground just makes the probability detection in what we call high value targets even more. But it also gives us the capability for a drone to cover quickly an area that we would typically not want to send an air sent or dog asset into. And an example of that would be a wide open field where you don't really need, or a park, for instance, some place where the general public typically can find the victim on their own. It's almost a waste of specially trained canine to run them through that area. But there is a possibility that your subject could be down in some tall grass in that area and not be seen easily from somebody just passing by. So it still needs to be covered. And with a drone, you can pass that area in just sometimes a matter of seconds, especially minutes, without having to try to relocate a canine asset there and that kind of stuff. And with their thermal imaging, even in the daytime, the victim is going to be easily distinguishable. And so those are all things that have really improved our effectiveness in the field with our ground operations.
Yeah, I can imagine. I didn't even think about that, the ability, the logistics on that. And well, I mean, if you get drones and people on the ground searching and dogs, you got a lot of increase in potential of a good result, right? If
Yeah.
you're in the right area. We've always known that that's questionable, right? Did
Yeah,
we
if we're
start
in
in
the
the
right
right area?
area.
How mobile
Big,
are
big
they?
if there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. You're always hoping they're going to be there, but there's always that chance. So let's shift a little bit from drones. I'm sure we could probably discuss that for hours, but and what about GIS and mapping? How's that? I mean, you can take us from start to finish. I know when I was with the group, we were still doing a lot by hand and trying to use what we could, but I think y'all have advanced a little more in mapping and probably live mapping like we talked about with trackers. Now give us a little snapshot of what you're doing with that currently in search and rescue.
Yeah, ironically, I think back when you were with the team many moons ago, we were still using Mapscos to get to the scene. We didn't even have GPS in our cars. And we joke about that occasionally now. I trained my daughter on how to use MapsCo when she was like 11 or 12 years old, and she got really good at it. So that has been a long time ago because she's in her 40s now. So,
Yeah.
but ironically, every time we had a search, it seemed to be in the corner of two pages, and it was very difficult to find just how to get there. With the advent of GPS in the cars today, we often joke about how did we ever even get to a search scene, especially in a rural environment that had very ambiguous addresses and typically down a long ranch road or something with very difficult coordinates to it. Whereas today, a deputy or a state trooper that's in one of those really rural areas can drop a pin and send it to you, and you can drive right up to the spot where the person disappeared, and do it without ever missing a turn. Well, most people can. I still miss them occasionally, but anyway, that technology is part of what helps us today. But within the search world itself, we use two types of software. One that helps dispatch our team and track their accountability and that kind of stuff, and the other one logs our activity on the ground and keeps our radio log, every radio call that goes in and out while we're on the search, and all that kind of stuff. And it overlays the data that we gather from the field onto a map into this reporting system so that we have it both in real time for our search management to evaluate the effectiveness of what assets we have operating in the field currently, what's already been done versus what needs to be done, that kind of stuff. And that's augmented by currently a simple free app on our phones. Every team that goes out connects to this software system through that app, and it shows their current position in real time as they move, much like an air traffic controller. That's such an advancement from the days that we were talking about before when we had nothing. We invented from that to radios that broadcast a GPS location every time the mic was keyed up in years past, and that was very cumbersome. It was pretty advanced for its day, but we eventually abandoned it because it had so many issues. But so we are at the point now where it not only doesn't cost us big bucks to have that technology, it's a free app. Every team that goes out connects to that system, and our base technician is watching them in real time where they move. Every other member of every other team deployed in the field can see where every other person is in real time so that we can augment what they're doing or work parallel to them or not get into their way even. Um, and so that's pretty cool technology today. And then we layer above that our dogs wear GPS collars. The off-lead dogs do anyway. So we actually track down even into more detail than just where the team went because the dogs often are traveling 75% further and more range away from the path that we lay down. And that becomes important information sometimes, especially if there's evidence to be recovered or if you're looking for parts in a human remains or if there's criminal activity involved. So we're able to see where the dog put his feet, not just where we put our feet. Um, that's typically not real time. It's the dog's track is then downloaded, but it all layers right on top of the same software system that tracks everything else. So at the end of the day, whether there's a find made or not, we're able to produce a pretty sophisticated mission report that documents date, and time of day of everything that we did while we were on the ground, including the path that the drone took. That now currently we just added software to that within the last 45 days or so that allows the drone's GPS track to be broadcast to our software in real time. It's been downloadable like the dog's GPS in the past, but it now is currently, we can turn that on or off. It overlays in real time directly on our map. So we can see what the drone is actually covering. At the same time, we can see what our other field assets are doing. So there's a lot of moving parts there. Typically, the general public has no clue that kind of stuff is involved in a ground search operation. They just kind of focus on the dogs, which is clearly one of the most important assets. And we, as dog handlers, are just their chauffeurs. But it's an orchestration of significant magnitude of a lot of different assets, including technology, to bring to bear on a missing person search. And it all has to be done pretty rapidly because, as we all know, search is an emergency, especially if you're looking for an endangered person, be it an autistic child or an Alzheimer's on the elderly side or any of that kind of stuff. It's urgent. It's an urgent search.
Yeah, it's got some great points. And I know, my search manager days that keeping track of all that and getting those visuals was sometimes the most difficult thing. And getting feedback and realizing, did we really cover this area like I think we did? But you made it, a good connection with all of that, because with all that data, all that information, I know that's all coming back to mobile command center, right. And just kind of start when the command center started. So that's probably not your first few years in service, but at some point you went to a command center. Now you're up to probably a pretty technically driven command center. So kind of walk us through that just a little bit.
Yeah, it's a lot like the history of the team in general. We thought we knew what we were doing in the early days, and a lot of times we looked like we knew what we were doing, and we probably did know a lot more than the rest of the people in the world at that time. But compared to where we are and what we know today, it was kind of scary to look back on those days. And our first command center was I'm going to say maybe a 60s or 70s model work van that blew smoke out the back and like a mosquito sprayer. And it was pretty pitiful. We had radios put in it, and we had a satchel phone back in those days, and we hand built places to sit and write out reports and stuff. And so we were lucky if it made it to the search, and we were lucky if the law enforcement didn't write us a ticket because the inspection sticker was out, and those kind of things. And so we graduated from that. That was probably within the first 10 years or somewhere in that neighborhood. We graduated from that to a custom-built 14-foot Wells cargo trailer, which was a little more sophisticated. From that, 5 or 6 years later, we graduated to a 23-foot custom-built Wells cargo trailer that weighed just short of 9,000 pounds. It was a beast to carry, but we had a 30-foot pneumatic mast and pretty sophisticated radio equipment in it, and we had laptops and monitors. And so it was for a volunteer search and rescue team in Texas. It was pretty sophisticated. But the thing that we've graduated to currently, as a result of a generous donation from an anonymous donor in 2018, we were able to upgrade to a Ford F550 truck with a 18-foot box with a nose cone on it, meaning it looks about like the size of a half of an 18-wheeler. And it has a bathroom and a kitchen and a workstation for 2 search managers. It has a workstation for a base technician, all of which are radio equipped and have large flat screen monitors and computers. It has a side door for the management people to go in and out. It has a back door and a back room that's separated from the command function that allows the teams, when they're finished their deployment, to come in the back door and go into another computer station back there and download their GPS coordinates from their dog, fill out their paperwork, all without having to interfere with what's going on in the front half where the command functions going on. And the command function is large enough that we can bring in law enforcement representatives, and we've got big screens at the end of that we can cast our current maps on and walk them through what has been done and show them all that stuff we were talking about before that's overlaid so they can see what's been covered and what hasn't. We also have that 30-foot mast again for our radio antenna, but we all on the top of that we have a closed circuit TV camera, and so we can monitor from 30. Well, it's probably closer to 45 feet based on where it's mounted. From that high in the air, what's going on around the command center, and that helps with our staging control, where our assets are located in proximity to their base. So when we need to reach out to one to deploy them in the field, we've got a pretty good working understanding of where they're at and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, we are kind of in the 21st century finally, looking to improve even some of that as well, especially with the drone. We just applied for a grant to try to get a vehicle dedicated specifically for the drone to make it a drone command vehicle that's off-road capable, and to maybe even increase our drone size. We have two thermal equipped drones now and two training drones, but we also are looking to increase the capability of at least one of those drones within the next 12 to 18 months, hopefully, if we can secure the funds. So yeah, we are technology-wise, we're in the 21st.
Awesome. Yeah, that's some great advances as far as, control that environment. It was always difficult to keep the field and the manager separate, especially on a big event. You got to let them focus and understand that. But you also got to let folks from the field download and decompress and talk and,
right,
do their stuff. So it sounds like a lot of great improvements in the mobile command center space as a whole business, I can imagine. I thought earlier, and before I forget it, how many volunteers do you think show up to a normal search with you guys on today versus,
You talking about emergent volunteers from the community or for my team?
For the Search One members showing up for a search now compared to 20 years ago? And just give me an idea on membership. I mean, how big is it now?
Yeah, we're not that much bigger in terms of membership. We probably have more deployable assets than we've had before, and we've kind of changed our profile in that we have assets that are not field deployable, meaning I've got what we call base technicians now. I have two of those that are not field deployable, but they are, and when I say field deployable, I mean going out and actually searching by foot with either a dog team or by themselves, because that requires you to be able to pass our physical fitness evaluation, which is still 5 miles cross country with a 20-pound pack in an hour and 45 minutes. So for you to be deployed in any capacity to do ground search, you have to be able to pass that. But we found that we have some really capable and intellectual people that don't have that field capability that can really support us. And so we developed that base technician, and they're the technical experts that run and manage all that technology that we've been talking about. As a matter of fact, my lead in that is a retired NASA scientist. She helped develop and put in space the space shuttle initially. And so she's forgotten more about technology than I'll ever learn. And so she's really helped us in that area. But in the wee hours of the morning, just like we've had 4 searches in the last 7 days, we average probably less than 10 people on the ground, but we will have our trailing canine asset will be the lead. Typically, that's the first asset we deploy to help us establish a direction of travel. And that anytime we put a dog team on the ground, that requires at least 2 people plus the dog. But we typically will have, with that trailing team, 2 flankers, the handler, the dog, and at least 1 police officer on the ground with them. That's the team that's on the ground. And then that team will also have at least 1, if not 2, marked patrol units that are controlling traffic, because inevitably the subject that we're trailing goes in and out of traffic, it's really rare that we have somebody, unless it starts in a very rural environment, that doesn't end up in a traffic situation. So we have to have that kind of marked escort. And then we will have air scent handlers in standby. And while they're in standby mode, they're typically doing what we call a hasty search, so which will be in their vehicle with their dog. They'll be working the neighborhoods ahead of what the trailing team is doing, looking for the subject on foot, if in case they're still moving ahead of us. And then if we find what we call a high probability target, we will deploy the air scent in that target area ahead of what the trailing dog's doing. So, for the benefit of your listeners, in terms of just strategy, if you think about an Alzheimer's patient's a good example, walks out of the house at 2 a.m. in the morning, it's 32 degrees, and they're wearing slippers and pajamas. The first question you have to ask is, well, where could they be? And if you think about how many different directions could they have gone when they left the front door, the answer to that is 360 different degrees on the compass. So you've got to first try to figure that out, because if they've been gone 2 hours by the time we get there, and that would be rare that we can get there within the 2 hour limit, not because of our travel time, but because it takes somebody X amount of time to figure out that the person's missing, then they're going to look for them. Then they're going to give up and call neighbors and friends, and they're going to look for them. Then they're going to call the police. The police are going to look for them. And then eventually the police are going to call us. So those X number of minutes and hours in there add up before we can arrive. And an average adult, even an Alzheimer's patient, travels about 2 miles an hour on foot if they're walking. And so if you think about that, if it's been 2 hours, they're traveling 2 miles an hour, that's a 4 mile radius. If you put that on a map, calculate it out, that's 50.24 square miles of area, which is the square miles of most cities in the Metroplex.
Yep.
Meaning the answer to your first question of where could they be is anywhere in the city limits. And so clearly that's an unmanageable objective to do on foot by yourself, or even with officers in patrol cars, and even with our assets. So we have to try to narrow that unedible pie into manageable pie bites, and the trailing dog is the key to that. We use that at the beginning of the search to establish a direction to travel, and so if we can narrow that down, then we can begin to focus on a smaller portion of that target and work from there. And then so we're probably going to run in the wee hours of the morning less than 10 people on a weekend daytime when and we get called in the middle of training pretty regularly as well. We're probably going to average 15 to 16 people plus dogs. We're running about 32, 33 members currently, and we ask all of them to get permission from their employers, if they have employers, to leave in an emergency. But some of those people work in jobs like fire and medical and police, where they don't have the option to leave on their shift, clearly. And even some of the others in certain situations wouldn't be able to do that. So that's why we have the team is as large as it is, so that anytime the bell rings, we have adequate resources to respond.
Yeah, that's a great point. It sounds pretty consistent, but I think that's been what you've seen throughout the career of Search One Rescue. Things happen, people change, people move,
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff happens. So yeah, well, it sounds like you'll still get some great support. You add that technology, you're still accomplishing more than you did 20 years ago. So that's a great thing. And it sounds like you're definitely getting the calls for service with those kind of numbers.
Yeah, well, we're actually averaging, I just finished doing the statistics for 2025 last night, and we had 110 calls for service, 111 victims confirmed, because at least one of those calls were for two children at the same time.
Oh.
But the victim count, and that would actually be a lot higher, because several of those calls were for the Kerrville flood, and that only on the on the stat sheet, that only counts for one, but we were clearly looking for a lot more than one victim down there. So there are very few teams in the nation that have triple digit call rates per year. And this is our fourth year in a row, I think, to break over 100 calls per year, which is pretty significant. It's like I said
Yeah.
earlier, when you combine that call rate with mandatory 4 hour training every weekend, that's a lot. We jokingly tell people in our recruitment speech, it's a second 40-hour work a week work 40-hour work week that you not only don't get paid to do, but you have to pay to do it. And oh, by the way, you've got to put up with the ticks and the chiggers and the heat and the cold and call out at all hours of the night. You got to go through a minimum of 6 months of basic training. You've got to pass a physical fitness test, and you got to pass a background check, and you got to pass a board review, and come on down.
Yeah.
So that's not a very appealing recruitment speech, and we are already targeting a pretty narrow base of people out there that would have an interest in the search and rescue world to begin with. And so out of the general population, this is one of the reasons it makes it so difficult for us to get new recruits is we have a narrow base to choose from, and we have very high standards, both in the screening and in the training and the testing process. And we are not willing to compromise any of that. And so if that kind of demanding description is appealing to somebody, that's a great start. It's not appealing to very many, but even that's not a guarantee that you're going to make it through the process. And even if you make it through the screening and get into the training program, then a significant portion don't make it through the training. So at the end of the day, for us to keep good people, to get good people is hard, to keep them is hard. But I do have people, like I have a guy right now that just retired 43 years from fire department. And the last 30 days, he's been on our team for 27 years, longest term member besides myself. But I've got a bunch that are in the 17, 18 year range and several in the 10. So recruitment is a difficult task for us, but we're hanging in there with what we've got so far.
Yeah, well, and you got to be obviously you got to be in North Texas, and you got to have some of those skills to help. So that even reduces your potential. But it's good. I think you're kind of adapting, like you said, that tech spot in places. I know before we've had dispatchers that people didn't know that coordinate dispatching with their team, and so you're obviously constantly looking for ways to improve the team and branch out, because it doesn't have to be the position of dog handler or manager or flanker, right? There's so much support going on that's awesome. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit and get back to technology. We're going to, I don't think we talked about thermal imaging yet. So it's another technology obviously y'all are advancing into. So how does Search One use the thermal cameras, and in what capacity do you use that on searches?
Yeah, well, clearly, first and foremost, and most frequently used is going to be the thermal imaging on our drone system, which is pretty significant. It's very sophisticated, and the high resolution imagery and zoom capability of those cameras are really impressive as well. But we also have two military grade thermal imaging, handheld thermal imaging units that can be carried out into the field under certain circumstances. That's a pretty big asset as well. And so it allows us to do a lot like what we just talked about earlier from the drone. We can have a drone over on one part of the city covering areas, and we can have the thermal imaging in the hands of hasty teams that are stopping and using that from a vantage point in an open field or in a lightly wooded area where it's easy to see large blocks of property and looking for hotspots. And I can tell you that handheld thermal imagery can pick up a rabbit at 250 yards. It has zoom capability. You can tell then by zooming in what that is. And so it's not the end all cure all for everything, because its practical application is limited kind of to those things because you can't really walk with it behind a dog team and look effectively with it ahead of the dog. We've tried that. It's just not practical. But it does have its place, and it's another one of those assets that we can deploy that layers on top of everything else and eventually increases your probability of detection. We also have one set of military grade night vision equipment, and ironically, as valuable as we thought that would be when we asked for the grant for it, it has been less used than the thermal because it can only be used at night. And it is affected by any ambient light that's in the area. And since the majority of our searches are in an urban environment, we kind of jokingly call them 7-Eleven searches because we're often parking in the 7-Eleven parking lot.
Yeah.
That's where most of our searches occur because they're all within a 150-mile radius, or 92% of our calls occur within a 150-mile radius of DFW Airport, and there's 8.5 million people within that area, or even within less than that geographical area, there's 8.5 million people, and most of them live in an urban environment. So I think about 20%, 25% of our calls are in a rural environment, which would allow for night vision at night a little more frequently. But those technologies are there, and we bring them to bear whenever the situation dictates.
So the thermal imagery, great option. I appreciate. I've seen some demos on that, especially from the drones, like you said, mobile and very distinct. So it's very successful. And I'm gonna switch to virtual reality. If you don't know, I've been doing some research, and my dissertation was on virtual and augmented reality and law enforcement training, mainly at the academy level. So I kind of wanted your insight on this, as how virtual reality is impact, or how you think it could impact search and rescue, anywhere from training to field applications, potentials like that. Well, do you see that showing up anywhere, or are you seeing it already in your field?
That's an interesting question because the answer to that is no. I have not seen it show up yet. And I try to stay tuned in to the rest of the search and rescue world and what's going on out there through forums and groups that I'm connected to. The first thought that comes to mind is we just revamped our flanker training program. I rewrote the flanker training manual last year, and just in the last 30 days, we have enhanced our scheduling and our program and tried to take a what has been averaging more like 8 to 9 months and sometimes 12 months training program down to a pretty rigid scheduled 26-week program for training. And so we're constantly looking for ways to enhance that, both in efficiency and in time. And so I could see that augmenting a few of those areas like distance determination, crime scene preservation, and possibly even some of the safety related issues in being a flanker behind a dog team if done properly. I don't know exactly how that would look, but yeah, I could see it playing a role at some point down the road. I would obviously need somebody with some expertise on how that's developed and everything to brainstorm that. And it sounds like you probably have that expertise, plus you have had the background in search and rescue, so you would probably know better about how it might be applied to a training environment, even than I would.
Yeah, you got some good insight there. I feel the same way, but like for example, right now I'm teaching a college level course on crime scene reconstruction, but I'm using virtual reality for the students to do a crime scene. So they can go into, I don't know if you've ever seen a 360, like a real estate tour where you look in a building. And so that kind of concept where they can go into that crime scene and look around, assess it, what did they see, and then go into phase two of what am I going to collect, what I need, simulate taking pictures, and then, tell me, or the learning process is what are you going to collect, and then, report your findings. So that's a really good way that we kind of approach that, to give them an environment that they can learn that process, as opposed to, in the classroom, having to build a scene and walk through it, which you can do as well. In the law enforcement side of it, we just used it, or, my experience was with de-escalation, de-escalating a character, that's in distress, be it mental health or drugs or whatever, teach them skills on de-escalation, but practice them. So they hear about it and they see videos. Now they have to actually practice it, interact, and do a scenario, and then they get feedback. So obviously that's repeatable, right? So I think in the search and rescue, like you're saying, the crime scene, even search areas, giving them a search area they can walk in through virtually, and then what did you see? What would you do? Get them to thinking. Even search managers, maybe even get some skills there as far as the thought process or table. So tabletops are really good with this kind of technology, because you can simulate that area. What would you search, but do it in 3D where it's more realistic, so they can get that vertical aspect and understand. But give them a scenario to work through and articulate, and how would you work this from start to finish. But you don't have to go out there and do it or simulate you already have a simulated scene that you can work through. Now, right now these aren't changeable, but even law enforcement is using some virtual reality, which is a little more advanced, where they can change up the scenes a little easier. So if you go up to that kind of level, you could actually start interacting, and it's more of it can be learning, but it's also going through the process, right? Repetitive practice before they get out in the field and get some of those nerves and edges off. Yeah, I think it's just one of those things that's out there, developing and processing, and I'm using it. I think part of it is it's getting a little bit easier to utilize and develop for somebody like yourself and myself on different arenas, specifically for search and rescue. Obviously, the big corporations with big bucks can spend thousands of dollars on a training system just for their people, right? Because they're going to end up with 300 people going through it. And then for that training, that's a reasonable investment for them. Yeah, we can talk about that more. I just wanted to see your insights on that, and what do you think? And
I think about the proficiency goal is utmost in our mind when we're training a new recruit, and having the ability to repeat something it becomes muscle memory. You kind of alluded to that, and the branching of shoot no shoot in the law enforcement. I have experienced that myself personally too, and so I understand that concept. But crime scene clearly is one that would be easily done, but also clue consciousness is another one that would be easy to repetitively train in a virtual reality environment, where you're walking through a room or a field or a disaster scene, even whatever, because we're always looking for clues that are going to lead us to the subject that's missing. And there are typically way more clues than there are subjects, right? So it's anything from a footprint to a broken twig to a soda can of their favorite drink that they probably left home with, to their wallet, to an article of clothing that they were wearing but they shed it because they got hot, or a fabric torn on a mesquite thorn that matches the fabric of their pants. Any number of things like that are all clues that our people, as they're going through the training process, have to be geared towards being very tuned in to that kind of stuff in the field. And so, yeah, I could see virtual reality being a big asset in that arena, at least.
Yeah, I think so. And I think part of the technology advancement and removing the, claustrophobic, nausea kind of environment is helping, because it's better equipment. They're faster. People used to get nauseous inside the headsets, but that's all related to how quickly the screen refreshes. The eyes, it's not fast enough for the eye, so therefore it kind of lags, and it's jumpy, even though you may not realize it. And causes that. So there's some, I think that's part of it as well, the advancements, and it's, getting down to reasonably priced where it's a training, most people can train with it. So to close out, I know we covered a lot, drones, technology, applications, thermal imaging, your mobile command center. And was there anything else in the search and rescue that you wanted to share with the audience that they may benefit from that we can close out with?
I think we've touched on most of the stuff. From my perspective as the executive director of the organization, we're always looking to recruit, and we're always looking for ability to fund the organization. Those are two things that go on behind the scenes. And we're always looking for new assets, like we talked about here. What else can we bring to bear? We've been very fortunate on our funding end, and so we are fairly well funded currently. And I don't have to beat the bushes for that as much as we used to in the earlier days. And we have the ability to spend some of that money on technology if it can prove to be another asset to the team. So, like you kind of alluded to this earlier, bringing technology assets to bear can replace the lack of personnel availability at times and still allow us to be extremely effective in the field without having as many people on any particular search. And so we're always looking for those kind of things that we can add to our toolbox. And so if anybody that's listening to this has understood our objective and how we go about what we're doing, and thinks, hey, this thing, whatever this thing is, might help you with that, hey, reach out. I'm interested in knowing about it.
Yeah, and on that note, how would they reach out to Search One Rescue if had any interest?
Well, we have a website, we have a Facebook page, we're on all the social media platforms. I could tell you what they are, but I don't have a clue. But you can Google us out there. Our website is real simple. It's just searchone.org, searchone.org. Pretty much everything you want to know about the team is there. How to reach out to any one individual. You can reach me at paul.lake@searchone.org if you want to email me direct as well. But how we train, our requirements, history, pictures, donations, all that kind of stuff is on the website. If you're interested in finding out more about us and you want to follow us on Facebook or some of the other social media, it's pretty easy. That's another one of those behind the scenes things that I would not be capable of, but I've got a person who's a social media expert that does nothing but our social media for us and kind of keeps us in the forefront. That's another challenge for us is we have two markets to tend to. One is the general public for our funding primarily, and the other is the law enforcement market because they're the people who use us. And we can't respond to civilian requests. We're by protocol only allowed to respond to governmental agencies, and that's typically law enforcement. Can be fire, can be state-run schools or something along that line, but it has to be an official request by a governmental agency, and so keeping our name and contact information in the forefront of those people, and those people contact points change so frequently. So that's another challenge for us, and social media kind of helps with that as well. So we're kind of out there in the marketplace trying to keep everybody informed that we're here and ready to help.
Good. Yeah, I think plenty of aspects for them to reach out and look into it, even if you want to support them, right? Because like Paul was saying, there's always a need for finances to support this, and team members are having to purchase a lot of equipment on their own, and they do, and supply a lot of gear on their own. But as we make it easier for them to do that, it's obviously, but the whole picture. So I appreciate that. But yeah, I think this concludes our session. Thanks, Paul Lake with Search One Rescue for your time with us today. And if you'll hang on just a second, let me close out. I'll get back with you.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you. Paul, that has been a fascinating discussion. We've learned how drones, GIS mapping, thermal cameras, and good comms are making a difference in urban search and rescue. And we got a glimpse of future tech like AR and VR that could further revolutionize how you train and operate. Thank you for sharing your experience. Before we wrap up, I want to let you know on how you can get more about the Search One Rescue Team. Paul recommends you contact them at www.searchone.org. That's SHERCHONE.org. We'll make sure to include the links to Search One Rescue on the show notes. For listeners, technology is enhancing search and rescue, but it's folks like Paul Lake and his team, dedicated volunteers with dogs and know-how, who bring it all together to save lives. It's a great example of tech and teamwork in action. If you're interested in supporting Search One or getting involved with a local search team, definitely reach out via their website. And if you know someone who could benefit from these tech and public safety discussions, please share this episode. Paul, thank you again for joining us, and thanks for everyone for listening to the Virtual Reality Reconstructionist. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.